I've been wrestling, with the idea that things over time get religified, and that they were never supposed to be thought of in a religious sense. So I think that it's coming at it from a different angle, but yeah, or not, I would argue against the idea that I don't think it would be equal to, medical practices, that the medical practices that we have now are better than they used to be. I would say that this is different. I mean, I think that's true.
You
But I think
read some of those doctors and see what you think. I mean,
no, right. No, I believe that. But what I'm saying is I don't think this is the same thing. I think there's a certain truth emanating from the Father versus us trying to figure out doctor practices. So I don't think those are apples to apples.
Okay, is Governor on there now?
He's not.
I opened this up and I'm recording it for you.
Oh, okay. You're recording it. Okay,
Yes, sir.
great. I just want to make sure somebody was.
Oh yeah, it's too good
All right.
not to.
I was going to go lay down for a little bit, but first I'll go over and pop something on Facebook here and let them know that something's going on.
One thing I have been, I think that our idea of spirit and soul, and, Jeremy and I have talked about this for a couple of years, but lately we've been talking about it for a while. The idea of spirit and soul that we know it is very Greek, Romanized, and out of all the different Gnostic sects that have arisen from a mixture of different ideas, you get that baggage. I do like, I like how Paul talks about it in Corinthians 4, where he says the things of the flesh are temporary, but the things of the spirit are eternal. And so if you use that definition to define spirit and flesh as he uses them throughout, it gives you a different outlook, not as if the spirit is one world and the flesh is another world. I think that's the incorrect way of looking at it. And I think that's a little bit of what Jeremy was talking about on Wednesday night, although we diverge upon what that leads to. The idea that there's one world. And in that world, there are some temporary things and there are some eternal things. And if you hold on to those eternal things, that boosts you into that eternal world. And if you hold on to the temporary things, it causes you to be a temporary being. But it's not so much spirit and flesh as we see it, because we know that flesh was not looked at as an evil thing in Judaism. Or in Yahwism proper. It was not looked at as an evil thing. But in the writings of Paul, if you take that spirit and flesh to be two different things, you see that as an evil thing. You see the flesh in total as being evil. But if you use his Corinthians 4 model to define flesh and spirit to meaning, it just means temporary and eternal, then that shifts everything, where flesh is not a different entity than spirit. It's all one thing, but the things that are temporary will be ra'ah, evil to you, because there's going to cause you to be temporary, if that makes any sense.
Well, in this context, if somebody can actually read that blog post.
Okay.
And because that's.
I can read it out if you want.
All right. Just.
I read fast. I read fast. All right. From testicles to immortal souls. I've been considering my colleagues' ideas about spiritual entities. We both borrow heavily from ancient literature to understand concepts like spirit, soul, nefesh, pneuma, etc. As for the immortal soul of man, we disagree. She says humans have this and continue to live after they die. I say that humans do not possess an immortal soul. Rather, in Hebraic context, the soul, mind, and body are one, and this mind-body unity is what the Hebrews call nefesh. And the nefesh is not immortal. She goes on to say that after the death of the body, the immortal soul is somehow implanted in another body, and this is called reincarnation. I, on the other hand, believe in the total resurrection of the dead, as is stated in the Creed, and I do not believe in reincarnation. But this entry is not really about the soul, but what the ancients believed about the testicles. Yes, I was pondering the beliefs of my colleague. I started to read a very good book by Aileen Roussel titled Porneia, on desire and the body in antiquity. Porneia is Greek, and it means immorality, and especially sexual immorality. I wanted this book because it promised a collection of medical essays from ancient times, and of course I'm interested in such histories. From the beginning of the book, page 14 and 15, we find a translation of an essay from Galen of Pergamum, 150 to 210 AD, a world-renowned physician in his time, that describes the function of the testicles. I don't mean to offend, but this is the first primary source in the book. All right, here's the quote. The testicles are even more important than the heart, since besides the heat and strength they give to animals, they are responsible for the continuance of the species, for they impart to the whole body a power similar to the sensory and power motor for which the brain communicates to the nerves, and to the pulsatory power that the heart communicates to the arteries, and this power causes the male's vigor and virility. When, as a result of continual sexual excess, all of the sperm has been lost, the testicles draw seminal liquid from the veins immediately above them. These veins contain only a small quantity of this condensed liquid, so when they are suddenly deprived of it by the testicles, which are stronger than they are, they in turn drain the veins above them, and so on. This draining process does not stop until it has involved every part of the body, so if it is constantly repeated, and if all the vessels and all the parts of the body are forced to give up their supplies until the strongest part is finally satisfied, the result will be that all parts of the animal or the living creature are drained out, not just of seminal fluid, but also of their vital spirit. For this is taken from the arteries along with the seminal fluid. It is hardly surprising, therefore, that those who lead a debauched life become weak, since the purest part of both substances is removed from their body, as well as this pleasure itself can dissolve vital tension to such an extent that people have died from an excess of pleasure. We should therefore not be surprised if those who indulge moderately in the pleasures of love become weak. I cannot argue with that last sentence, for I am sick with love, says the groom, Canticles 5:8 ESV. However, the rest of Galen's assessment is based on something other than investigation. For at that time, there were no dissections of humans allowed. So we might say that Galen's idea about the testicles and sperm being squeezed, as it were, out of blood in the adjoining veins are antiquated and totally incorrect. Now, let me make a connection here to the ideas of Aristotle and Thomas Aquinas on the soul. The notion that a human being is a soul, spirit, immortal soul, living soul, absent spirit, as is laid down by these ancients, as well as their ideas of immortality, resurrection, resuscitation, reincarnation, heaven and hell, that we of the 20th century have accepted as valid, maybe and probably are just as antiquated, obsolete, and illogical, even observed as Galen's baseless conception on the more humble parts of a human male. Is my comparison valid? And if so, what might I consider to be a more reliable model for these possibly invalid terms and systems of human spirituality? I've been looking at the concept of morphic resonance in the last couple of years, a very quantum-oriented system developed by a fellow believer and scientist, Rupert Sheldrake. Perhaps after hearing this interesting lecture, we may corporately recognize a more modern and certainly a more accurate conception of the human psychonome spiritual system. And are you familiar with anything from Sheldrake, Rich?
Okay, the point I'm making here is that, okay, I'm going to go, but the stuff that we get about these things are at least 300 BC, way, way, way old stuff. You want to put it on the back, fine. Just old stuff, and perhaps our whole concept in using that is like trying to use Galen today to try to talk about reproduction. Because obviously, you're not going to squeeze sperm out of blood. That's ridiculous. So perhaps the body, soul, spirit, and all this stuff is just obsolete. That's the point I'm trying to make. And do we have any better kind of paradigm? And I'm just suggesting that perhaps morphic fields is a better one, certainly more modern, more quantum than a biblical or really a Greek model that goes back to 300, 400, 500 years before the coming of modernity, of Messiah.
So quickly, can you answer one question? So I understand that morphic fields being that there's fields of memory and kind of like a quantum memory that translates through time and all that. How are you equaling that to a counterpart for spirit, soul, body definition.
Well, I'm thinking that always when people try to bring forth reincarnation, they always use examples like, well, this child knows everything that his grandfather did. He knows his grandfather. He remembers dying like his grandfather.
Sure.
This has to be reincarnation. Well, no, it doesn't. If there's any value to the idea of quantum resonance and fields and that these fields overlap, there's no reason why we should use a paradigm or a model like reincarnation. It's so old, and perhaps it's obsolete altogether, like Galen's ideas of Galen was used, this nonsense was used up until the 17th century by physicians. No wonder everybody died all the time. So maybe our whole paradigm's wrong. I just offered for you to check out quantum resonance and see if there isn't something in there that strikes you as being a lot more authentic than this old stuff. I'm just relating.
Yeah. I've always thought of quantum resonance, the idea that, because I go hunting, and so the ducks and the geese fly the same path every single year, even if they had not been there the previous year. And you can say, well, they're in a group, and so maybe someone else in the group has gone. But even individuals that get left behind or start out late or go early, they know where to go. They land in the same spot that their parent did. And even in my area of Oregon, there are certain geese that look like all the other geese, but they don't migrate. They stay here in Oregon. It's like 10% of them, and their kids then don't migrate either. Their offspring. So it's very interesting so I think that's a real thing. And I mean, you've got the idea of Einstein and spooky energy, as he called it, where I don't know if you guys are familiar with that, where in quantum mechanics, two things that were birthed from the same place can be on opposite sides of the universe. And when something happens to one of them, it also happens to the other one at the same time. And if you apply heat to this one, then this one heats up, but it's all the way.
Exactly.
It's nowhere near the heat.
Kittens and so forth.
Yes.
Good.
So that is very real. That's scientific. Now, to take that into the idea that that's what causes the thought of reincarnation, or I feel like I lived another life, is certainly a possibility. I would think that there are also other possibilities. The idea, being raised in the assemblies of God, everybody wants to be super spiritual and try to define everything. And there's some very good things I did learn and have learned from them. But my immediate reaction of being raised that way would say, well, that's demonic. Like the same demon that possessed his grandfather is possessing him and giving him these ideas. I don't know if that's the catch-all answer, like the God of the Gaps answer for resonance, but that would be another possibility, I would think. But that could also work with morphic fields. It doesn't mean if that's happening, there aren't morphic fields as well. I don't know. Does anybody else have any ideas?
Oh, can I jump in? Hi, guys.
Hey.
Hi.
Hi, Jackson. How are you feeling? Well, I came in late, but I had to make a comment. So you're talking reincarnation, body, soul, and spirit, but I have to ask you, in Jackson, just because something is like old, just because literature that is ancient uses words or phraseologies to express a concept, and then in modern parlay or terminology, we find the very similar, kind of picture being painted, but with more modern words. Why would you throw one out and adopt the modern? Or see, because they say quantum physics is really saying nothing different today than what the Kabbalah or what Jewish mysticism has. there's nothing different between a morphic field or
Is the Kabbalah like the be all and end all of everything? I mean,
well, okay, don't use that word. Use the word mysticism. The mist, because when you're talking these worlds, you're talking about worlds you can't physically see. I can go into the next room, physically take my body and go there. So I can kind of do that and track myself. I can't go into some of these other dimensions literally. So I have to use words and symbols and, you know, kind of trust the scriptures, what information they give us. So it's a little more difficult, but you can do it. So I'm saying you can't throw out the concept of other dimensions just because you can't physically get there. When the Bible's replete with the fact that, you know, there's other dimensions where other entities are.
Well, maybe that's all wrong. All I'm saying is let's consider the fact that maybe our paradigm are as antiquated as Galen's is in regards to physiology. Just throwing that out. I'm not.
Why would you want to do that? But why? I just want to say, because if it says if there's a prophecy, you know, the prophecy of Elijah that he will turn the hearts of the children back to the fathers, which I've interpreted, which many people say is like, okay, we're the children, we're going back to our fathers, the patriarchs. So in other words, there's nothing new under the sun. They knew all this stuff. There's nothing new. It's just a repackaging of the same. Why would you want to throw out the patriarchs' understanding? And just because the modern people use.
We're not throwing anything out. I'm just saying that maybe their understanding, maybe we've gained some knowledge in the last 3,000 years, and that's quite a possibility. You know, me too. We keep going back to some of these concepts that might just be completely obsolete. Just because they come from religious literature doesn't mean that they're right.
Well, why would you not?
That's just a matter of talking about it.
I know that there are discrepancies, but basically we trust our writers, our prophets, our sages.
We can't just say that, oh, well, like you said, mysticism is the answer to it. We can't just say something is without even considering the possibility. I'm sorry, I'm gonna leave off now. Wish I could do more, but my head's too befuddled with morphine right now. Okay.
Yeah, that's a good discussion. I think that I don't think that we just throw out everybody. I agree with that, Liz, but I don't think that we take everybody either. Just because they wrote something about a subject doesn't mean they were correct. And of course, we have the biblical instruction on how to root out what is correct and what is incorrect. And like you're saying, some of these concepts that you're dealing with, Liz, and diving into are you can't see them. They're unseen by the natural eye. So there's going to be some guesswork involved. And you take the route of just taking all the information in from every source and using all of that information. And like you said, sort of trusting that information. I'm a much less trusting person. I've got a document from 3,000, 4,000 years ago, 2,000 years ago, and I don't know who this person was, what their motives were. Like for instance, even from 2,000 years ago, you've got the writings of Flavius Josephus, you've got the writings of Eusebius, and you've got the writings of all these guys, but all of them were in a different time, in a different place. They had different pressures being put on them. And I specifically mentioned Eusebius and Josephus on purpose, because you can't take at face value everything they said, because even Josephus himself wrote one work for the Roman Empire and one work he wrote in Aramaic for another audience, but it was the same work, but it says different stuff. So is it valuable information? Are we way better off for having it? Are we way better off for having some of these sources that you're citing, Liz? Absolutely, because it gives us a picture of what was going on. But I would I would tend to lean towards Jackson's side, and the idea that just because that was going on does not mean it was correct or we should get involved in it. But it also doesn't mean it was incorrect either. We've got to ferret that out, and we're all required to do that according to our own convictions and our own logic. And since we're all different people coming from different places, we don't always end up at the exact same spot, which is why we have these things in the first place. But does anybody else have any ideas on either, number one, the idea of morphic fields versus spirit, soul, and body, and how those two might be the same or different, or number two, the idea of trusting or not trusting an ancient document and why?
Well, I'd like to qualify some of the things. You make these statements about me, Rich, that I don't make statements about what how
Correct me.
So you cannot just throw out a statement about me. I am a discerner like everybody else. I'm an ancient text researcher. So I read all the texts and I do discern them. To say that I just accept everything at face value, that's just not true. All right. Okay. So I am much of a discerner, a vetter, someone who.
I apologize.
Yeah, really. That's not fair. So anyways, but the thing is, it's a two-sided coin, and this is what having wisdom and discernment is. Why you do vet the text, and you try to get the larger, context of everything. There, in my opinion, I'm a positive. I err on the side of that. I do believe the Ruach leads those who want to know truth. So I'm not motivated by fear. I'm motivated by the fact that I believe Yahweh is good and that he will reward those who diligently seek him. Now, it doesn't mean that every rabbit trail is going to end up in total truth, or that you're never going to find truth in a rabbit trail. You just got to walk. You got to go. But I do believe trust. That's what I'm saying. If we can't trust to a certain extent our elders, because that's what they are. They're our patriarchs, our sages, our fathers. Then you're probably, to me, you're probably in the wrong camp. Then go trust Hindu scriptures. If we can't trust to a certain extent that the Hebrews have received the greatest portion of truth of any group on the planet about Yahweh Elohim, then there's a disconnect to the faith that we profess and the actual practice. I don't think we have. So I'm just saying, because today there's so much deconstruction going on. People literally are falling off the wagon left and right.
So I'm going to ask so I don't misquote you. So you're saying that if anybody wrote about spiritualism and they were a Hebrew, they're our father and we should trust them.
Rich, no, I didn't say that.
Okay, so what are you saying? Because that's what I'm getting out of it. So correct me. What are you saying?
He's saying you don't have to. You can see it's a cup is half full or half empty. Both are true, right? That's a maxim. I don't look at a cup as being half empty. We have a tradition of sages and of prophets, Isaiah, these people who have left us a legacy. Okay. I'm a Hebrew, so I trust my legacy to give me a large, correct, big picture. Does that mean every detail is right? Of course not. Nobody's going to check their brains at the door. But what I'm trying to say is that our patriarchs, I believe that they were much more accurate to this and closer to the source. So I would trust ancient worldviews that paint very similar, that can be verified, through the ages, through scripture, instead of some newfangled, being tossed by every wind of doctrine.
You think you would trust Galen's if you were going to go for a gynecological matter, and would you trust him? He's ancient. He's the top doctor of the first 17 centuries.
Well, yes, but has any body of knowledge ever been 100% accurate? To say they used to bloodlet people, would you let somebody do that to you today?
I think that's his point, Liz.
We're all trying to discern, but too many people want to throw out Jewish mysticism as having no foundation. It has one of the most trusted foundations. If you're going to be a spiritual person and try to understand spiritualities, I would much rather people do it from a Judeo-Christian point of view than go trying to be a New Ager or a Hindu or, you know, a Buddhist or something. That's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, I don't think anybody's arguing for Buddhism or Hinduism. I'm just looking back even from our prophetic fathers who, you know, there's the cycle of Israel that's pronounced throughout the Tanakh, in that they did their own thing, they followed other gods, they got captured or destroyed, they cried back out to Yahweh, then he saved them, brought someone to save them and restored them, and then that cycle happens all over again. So in that time, they're sacrificing their kids on the altar. They're sacrificing to foreign gods. They're weeping for Tammuz in the temple. They have erred in, the scribes have sown lies in the middle of the Torah, according to Jeremiah 7 and 8. All of these things are happening, and so in the midst of that context, these works are being created. So to me, I'm automatically suspect of any work that's being created because it's in the midst of that emic context. And so I'm not trustworthy. I use the Torah's instructions on how to decipher that. So if somebody says something about reincarnation and I don't see that in the Torah, then I would not do that. Just as if somebody says something about bloodletting, I wouldn't do that either. So yeah, I come at it from a much more skeptical stance because of what we're told about how the children of Israel lived and how they went whoring after other gods. And even if you want to go to the tribe of Judah with Benjamin and Levi, it points out quite clearly that they actually ended up doing worse things than the 10 tribes did, but because of the covenant with David, he did not scatter them to the corners of the earth. So they did worse. So to say that everybody that wrote about something, from a Judaic Christian perspective, that I should take and follow every rabbit trail, I wouldn't agree with that at all. But I go the safe route, I guess. I try to, I do like, in my mind, like Paul says, to avoid the very appearance of evil. So if I see a Christian or a Hebraic writing that seems ra'ah, according to the Tanakh, proper in Yeshua's words, then I stay away from it. But that's just me.
Rich?
Yes, ma'am.
I would submit that the resonance that we're speaking of is in fact not a modern idea at all. It has been always. It is not modern. It is not a modern concept. It has always been. The geese always knew how to fly where they needed to go.
Sure, absolutely.
It always needed to know. It always knew where to go to spawn. Yahweh did that.
Yeah, I agree. I absolutely agree. But and I don't have, I don't have visions of me being what was it that Onia said the other day? Why does everybody think that they have reincarnated from an awesome person? Why aren't they the evil child of Isaiah or whatever it is? I can't remember his name. That was a funny one. But everybody has these visions of this or that or whatever, and it's always, it was always like the super spiritual person in the Pentecostal or charismatic church. The Holy Spirit would, catch a hold of them, and why did he always take them up to the front in front of everybody and on the stage? Why didn't he take them out back to the parking lot or something? You know what I mean? Like, so reincarnation, I think, is not an old thing, though. Although I think what you're saying, Ann, is correct. That it's an old idea, but I don't think it's valid. Whereas I think that the geese flying a certain way and everything, and that memory, that even though they weren't there and placed in them, can be, as we know scientifically, it can be transferred through DNA and different things like that. So,
but I think that there is a truth to this, the resonance we're speaking of, in that it was always there. And so I'm saying, I also think that if, in fact, one soul was implanted into another, and then this body was reborn, or whatever, however you describe reincarnation. What if one's saved and one isn't? How does that how does that all come out in the wash? I mean, how how does redemption happen if, that's just crazy.
Well, yeah, that would be crazy, and I would classify it as such. I don't think that there's one soul being born into two different bodies. Like you just pointed out, it creates a problem there. So yeah, I would think that that's crazy, but I think
it's called confusion, and he's not the author of that.
Right, absolutely, I would agree. Now, I think Liz probably has a different take on that, and I don't know if you have an answer for that, Liz.
Well, that would not be a Hebraic perspective. I did a teaching on lots. You should do the study on the question of lots. Everything is under Yahweh's control, so that wouldn't happen. He knows where every soul is. Souls just don't get randomly. If reincarnation is a true Hebraic doctrine, okay, believe me, it is under Yahweh's jurisdiction. He has it all figured out, and souls aren't just, like bubbles reincarnated everywhere. It's a very linear path. A righteous soul will go to another righteous soul. So that's a mute point. That's sort of, it's trying to throw a straw dog into the argument, because, what does it say? A sweet stream you can't be bitter and sweet at the same time. Okay, so what's your idea of, because I don't know where you stand on this, but in a lot of the reincarnation stuff I've seen, it's, you get multiple chances to get it right, to do it right because of the mercies of God, et cetera, et cetera. So even if you didn't do it right the first few times, you start catching on and learning. So do you adhere to that or no? Well, I will tell you what I've read. You have to understand. I will read a body of literature to try to understand it all. Okay, doesn't mean I ascribe to it. I'm just trying to understand. They will say that a soul gets 3 times. This is the covenant that 3 times it will cycle through. Like the 3 times, 3 strikes and you're out. That's actually where it comes from. It's not a forever thing. It's not random. It's a very specified and controlled kind of process that Yahweh tries the souls of men. Just telling you.
And where do you get that? Where's your? I'd like to study the evidence you have for that, Liz.
Well, I mean, these are things I've read in the Zohar. Okay, what I'm trying to. This is something I read in the Zohar. I could find you the citation. I don't have it in front of me, but I'm just telling you that is the premise of the doctrine. All right. Anyone else got anything at all, or any other questions? We can discuss anything. We're allowed. No, hey, Jeremy, what about, because you did your, I don't know if the recording's up on YouTube yet, but you did your thing on Wednesday night. How does all this fit in kind of with what, I know you were coming at it from a little different angle, but are there any overlaps?
A little bit. I mean, I think you said a statement like, I don't see, the same soul going into 2 different bodies, but, kind of based on what we talked about on Wednesday, that wouldn't be the case. I mean, you would actually have your soul put into the new body. And so this would happen one time, right, in the resurrection, which is, I think, the only way we would differentiate it from reincarnation is that you have this one opportunity and your soul is put into, for lack of a better way, and in a short way of describing this process, a soul goes into another body. So, I mean, you could call that reincarnation in that I am incarnated again, because I think that you do go for the eternal life. You're incarnated again for the eternal life. Basically unto judgment, and then you either receive the second death or you live on. But I wouldn't, just going from what, my big picture view is, I would say there isn't enough time for multiple lifetimes or multiple chances, or even like, it doesn't really make sense in the big picture that I would understand. But I'm open also to reading things like the Zohar and have done a bit of that. But like I said, all these things have to fit into a bigger picture for me as well. And there is a little bit of overlap that I would say is there. Just we're talking about terms that probably need to be defined a bit more, but
What is?
yeah.
That's my favorite. Bill Clinton.
Well, going back to the teachings of Yeshua, how do we find were there teachings that would support this, that because I always go back to that foundational truth.
Yes, and thank you for that. Yes, Yeshua is number one, and it's described that he's supposed to be number one. Actually, in the Torah, it describes that the prophet like Moses is number one, and we should listen to every word he says. So, in hashing this out a couple weeks ago, when I studied it out, I didn't see any words of Yeshua saying reincarnation is real. The only thing that is used to say that is when he says about John the Baptist that if you can believe it, this is Elijah. I never took that to be reincarnation, but reincarnationists take that to be a literal Elijah. So John the Baptist wasn't John the Baptist. He was Elijah, whose name was John the Baptist in his second life. That's a stretch for me. I always took it to be like, this is the guy that has the same message or in the like manner as Elijah. He's, out there in the desert. He's getting, he's eating weird stuff like Elijah was, that kind of thing. But that's the only thing that even that they can even cite.
To me, that's more easily explained using morphic resonance.
Sure, absolutely. Yes, I would agree. But I'm just telling you, you were asking, does Yeshua say anything about it? That's the only argument I've seen for it. Obviously, go ahead.
Yeah, but I don't see that as reincarnation either.
Well, you'd have to really see, and I do agree with you, Jeremy, you have to really define terms. There has to be a lot of time spent on terms because, see, to a Christian, most Christians' idea of reincarnation is really kind of only a Hindu Buddhist type of thing. They don't really understand because it's never, and it's a very negative thing. I mean, that's like, okay, so you got to kind of filter through all that. But like I said before, it is an extremely ancient and verifiable, and it has a track record doctrine within certain sects of Judaism. Now, that's a fact, okay? Certain Pharisees did believe in this, okay? And they have very thought-out doctrines. And a lot of times, it's like, again, the same thing, like the Trinity. You can't find the word Trinity. You can't find the word rapture, but you can find they're conceptually, many things are in Scripture conceptually. We want to find the word, that we put on it there so that we can have peace, and we don't want to do all the digging necessary. It is a theology, but when they talk about John the Baptist, what are they saying? It's like, let me ask you a question, Rich. You see, okay, Yeshua, I don't know if you are, I ascribe to a more seen understanding of the two comings of Yeshua, Messiah ben Joseph and Messiah ben David, right? I mean, he came the first time as Messiah ben Joseph, the shepherd, to go after the lost sheep, right? He comes the second time, Messiah ben David. But here again, you have two different, I could say, what is Yeshua? Is he David or is he Joseph? I mean, what's going on here? And this gets into a much deeper concept of the soul. See, we know bodies perish. Our bodies are really not even part of this discussion. When you're talking about reincarnation, you're talking about the soul and what is going on in the soul and where does it go during times when it is not present in the earth in a body, all right? And there's a lot of information on that.
Yeah.
Not everybody agrees, but I'm just saying the discussion is really about the soul. And
right. I would encourage you actually, and I don't think it's up yet, but to just look at Jeremy's presentation on what the soul is, because the way you just described it and the way he breaks it down from how Genesis describes it are different. So the soul is not separate from the body, and Jeremy could do a better job at this than I could. I'm just he's the primary source.
But I didn't get to hear it, Jeremy, and I apologize. But I mean, even there in the soul, you have got 5 Hebrew words that designate soul. Not all soul is the same. There's different levels of soul life, and different things in creation have different levels of soul life. So, you know, there's the nephesh. Our nephesh soul is attached to our body.
It's not attached to our body. It is the breath and.
No, it's not. Now, I checked. The word neshama is nowhere in Genesis 1. It's in the Hebrew. It's not there. We're not talking. Breath is not ruach. Ruach is not neshama. These are very precise Hebrew words.
Yeah, I didn't say any of that was. Here you are putting words in my mouth. How apropos.
Well, I'm pretty sure in the first session that you were saying how neshama, breath, is in Genesis 1.
No, I didn't say that. No, I said that neshama is not just for humans. It's also described as being with other animals.
Not the word neshama.
Yes, ma'am. In Genesis 7.
Nephesh, neshama, ruach.
I understand the difference, and you're incorrect.
Well, we'll have to get out of control. We'll have to get into the Hebrew, pull up a Bible program, go for word, Hebrew word for word. But be that as it may, it doesn't matter. Breath is not ruach. Ruach is not nephesh. So,
I didn't say any of that was. I don't know where you get that. Where do you think I said that breath is ruach and ruach is neshama? I didn't say any of that.
Well, then I apologize.
So
I would be interested in your definition of reincarnation. I'm serious. I would like to, you know, if you have one, maybe you can text it to me or put it up on the chat.
Did you ask that of me, Ann? I'm sorry, I didn't hear you first.
I did. I thought that you would probably be the expert on that, a definition of reincarnation.
I'm not trying to be an expert. I'm just saying I have done some reading. So I'm just trying to say that I don't think it's good to just totally paint with a broad brush, you know.
Well, you seem to know more about it than any of us, so I just thought you might be the one to ask.
I think there is something with it called the world soul, anima mundi. You know, there's this concept when you get into this world of the soul, it's huge and it's many levels, and there's many, you know, it's see, this is what gets me is Ephraimites. We really the Jews have got a lot of deep understanding that I don't think in a lot of ways we've really tapped into. Opinion.
Jeremy?
Yeah, well, I think that there is a lot of information that the Jews have that that we are not necessarily involved with. But here's where I think maybe Rich, you were trying to kind of point out and didn't mention the specifics, but there's plenty of evidence throughout history that the Jews have adopted all sorts of things that are not true from other cultures, paganism, you know, idol worship, yada, 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 including there was a time where Hinduism was meshed with Judaism. There's no doubt in my mind when I've done research into Hinduism and Kabbalah and Zohar stuff, that I've seen those parallels. I mean, you go look at the tree of life in Kabbalah and compare it to the chakras of Hinduism. It's not to say that it's necessarily false, but it might be getting into falsehood as well. There's going to be mixture in there, and I think, you know, I would always just, I don't have a problem reading these things, but I don't know. For me, I hear, you know, I hear the message that we definitely shouldn't be afraid of these things or whatever. But at the same time, I don't want to say that I discern that they're truths either.
Can I add something here? I have not seen any kind of primary source truth that the Greeks got their theology of the soul from the Hebrews. Now, I can give you Aristotle's the anima on the soul, goes back to 350 BC, that is in many ways exactly what is Liz is describing here. And this was something that was lost until the Muslim world conquered Europe and brought Aristotle back in Arabic. And when it was rediscovered by Thomas Aquinas in the church and the Kabbalists, the whole of these occultists or mystical people, and it all goes right back to Aristotle, and before him, again, Heraclitus. Now, I know that you're thinking, well, you know, the Hebrews taught him that, but why don't you go back and look at the source documents? I mean, the primary sources. I can't find anything before this on these subjects, and I submit to you that these come straight from Greek, not from Hebrew.
Well, I'm sorry to dominate.
Read these at all? I just wonder if you've ever read them, or anybody's ever read them or studied them.
Yes, Jackson, they're there. This is the point. I remember you saying that.
I just, you know, I find some of the claims that you make without evidence. It's a matter of you saying this, like Kabbalah, for instance, being age old, going back to Abraham or Moses or whoever. It's common knowledge that goes back to the 12th century.
No, see, this is where, in my opinion, it's important to get large Hebraic concepts. The Deuteronomy is very clear that as long as Israel, if they would keep the commandments and honor them as, you know, Yahweh's the high God, and that they would be the head and not the tail. I mean, that they would be the most prosperous, you know, nation. And all. Now, of course, we know that didn't always happen. They had their great seasons, you know, with Solomon, with David and all this stuff. But by and large, the people had a really hard time and didn't do a very good job, whatever. But the point is, he said, if you do disobey, you know, these things, he said,
so like,
when you say that it came from the Greeks, what is being portrayed is the fact, again, that Israel's intellectual property, their understanding of Yahweh Elohim has been stolen. And this is exactly what Yahweh said would happen. The reason you see in Hinduism, all these religions, a lot of commonality, these are much lesser, they're much more inferior, and they're full of errors, and they have a lot of more dark side practices and things to them, to the ancient understanding of Yahweh Elohim that the Hebrews did have. I mean, I have to believe that when Moshe on the Mount Zion, when the children received a very clear and correct revelation. I mean, I believe that as a truth. Now, did it get perverted, distorted? Did Israel lose its place among the nations as the leader of truth? Did the Greeks come in? Jackson, it says.
Aren't you assuming that stories about Abraham and Enoch and Melchizedek actually were written back in 1800 BC or 2000 rather than they're written in, say, 400?
It doesn't matter when they're written because of the oral tradition. The point is,
it makes a lot of difference to me.
Do you believe there really was an Enoch? Do you believe there really was an Abraham? Do you believe? I mean, if you don't believe,
doesn't make any difference what I believe. I know I know the provenance of those texts. They don't go back to 3000 BC. Enoch lived 1,000 years after Adam. He was alive. There's a book of Enoch. Go back to then. No, we don't have anything that goes back to then. Except,
but we have a bloodline. We have a remnant that has been. It says in every generation, and that means
what you have is lore. You don't have history. You have lore there.
Where I can't. If you don't believe. See, that gets down to a thing of faith.
Yeah, that's right. I'm talking about evidence, not just what I believe.
There is evidence. Like I just told you, against a
You've
pilot.
never given a lick of evidence. Let's just put it that way.
I tell you, read against a pilot. Okay, you don't like Josephus when he doesn't agree
I
with
like Josephus all the time, but he's
Why would he
obviously
lie?
biased.
Why would he
living
lie?
off Rome?
Why would he lie? No,
He's
there
living in a palace in Rome, for crying out loud. He wrote 2 accounts of the war.
okay.
Like Rich
So a
said.
lot of Isaiah, a lot of the priests who were of royal, lineage and did have, did live royally, so to speak. We can't trust it. No, the point is, if you were to study out the historians, that Josephus quotes. I mean,
No, I'm not studying historians. What I want to study is I want you to give me some primary source. Do you know what the primary source
is? Josephus?
You make a claim that all the ideas of the Greeks and everybody else come from the Hebrews, but you don't give one lick, not one lick of evidence. Just
what is wrong with Josephus and against Apollyon?
Josephus is just 2,000 years ago. I'm talking about 3,000 years ago.
And he will list in there, read his
What's Josephus
evidence.
had to do with this? He's not an occultist.
Read who Josephus cites as being accurate. They will even tell you, the Greeks in their writings, that they didn't originate this stuff. See,
you ever take a look at Whiston, the critique of Whiston's translation, for instance? No, you haven't. No, you haven't. And why are you even talking about Josephus? What does that have to do with this?
Well, you want a primary text. I mean, then you can't use Josephus for Revelation.
A primary text is someone that was there. Somebody was there that's witnessing. Like Revelation is a primary text. But Kabbalah, there's no primary text there that I know of. And the Zohar, where does that go back to? 1200 AD?
I showed you in the Dead Sea Scrolls.
Show me some proof.
There is.
I can't get through to this lady, Rich. Maybe you can. I think that I'm just too messed up here on morphine. So.
Well, you don't have to. I'm sorry.
I think what he's saying, Liz, is that Josephus is going to be a good source for certain things that happened around Josephus's time, and even then, he's not going to be perfect because of the different things that he had going on. And we can use his list to try to help put us on the right track to find those original sources. And to be fair to you, Liz, it's going to be very, very difficult to find, a 3,000-year-old source on this. But at the same time, then that would cause me to be, a lot less, not as forceful as you are in trying to show these things to be true. I think I would put it more in a, this could be, but to me, this could be doesn't mean a whole lot.
When you make a claim like it's the claim to me, the claim's outrageous.
All right, this is my opinion.
Myself,
I'm sorry. I know, Jackson. It's my personality. I'm sorry. So I make an allowance for my personality. Seriously, this is my opinion. But I will quote you, John Reuchlin, who they call the father of the German Reformation. See, people spin things, and you can get it from anybody's spin, and I don't really care. But in my opinion, he states that all wisdom and true philosophy are derived from the Hebrews. That Plato, Pythagoras.
How does he know? Does he have some evidence there, or primary source, or something? Let's have it.
Jackson, you don't understand how many texts we don't have.
Which is going back to 700 years ago. You're talking about the German Reformation. That would be in 1500. So we're talking about 500 years.
So how about studying linguistically? All right. See, it depends on who you want to spin.
You're making a claim that flies in the face of everything that people have spent their lives studying because you believe it, and that's all right.
No, there are tons of Kabbalists who spend their lives studying it and will come out on the other side. So it doesn't mean one side has to be right and the other side has to be wrong.
I was wondering if it wasn't John Roycebrook that you were mentioning, but you said it was somebody else. All right, who is that?
John Reuchlin.
Reuchlin.
Right. Okay. But what I'm trying to say, this is why you will find commonality of Hebrew concepts in all the religions of the world. Linguistically, why you will find that the religions of the world in their liturgies and in their sacred books had traces of Hebrew language and Hebrew practices.
So can I ask you a question, Liz?
John Reuchlin is a Kabbalist. Oh, no, well, no wonder he would say that.
Right. Yeah, I think that Anne makes a good point here in the comments, because everything to me goes back to Yeshua. But my question is, Liz, what is your, like, what is the end game to say that, hey, there's pieces of Hebrew in the different, are you trying to get syncretism in a sense where everything gets meshed together, or where do you think this leads, I guess?
We have the truth. We Hebrews have the truth. As tarnished and as muddy as it is, whatever, I would say to the nations of the world and their religions, yes, you have a piece, you have a partial truth, but I'm a Hebrew, and we have the truth. I can explain to you who Yahweh Elohim is. That's the point. That's what Josephus is trying to say to the Greeks. Look at everything you know because of us. It says that Japheth will dwell in the tents of Shem. It doesn't say the other way around.
So you're talking about reincarnation is a deep-set Hebrew concept?
Well, it is one of them, yes.
In the Old Testament, not
Did every Hebrew ascribe to it? No.
None of them.
I would disagree with that. I would say this is a very ancient, all the way back to the Garden of Eden fallacy that is being perpetuated throughout time. That's why you see it in all the different cultures in different ways, whether it's reincarnation or whether it's the Egyptian ideas about the soul or whatever. It goes back to Genesis 3:4. You shall not surely die if you eat of this fruit. That's what it comes back down to. You shall not surely die.
An alleviation of sinful ways. Is that what you're saying? It's another way to alleviate sinning.
It's a deception at the very root of the very root of our existence, that we either exist or we don't exist. We either live or we die, we perish. And in the garden, the enemy was saying, you shall not surely die. You shall not surely die. That's the big lie. And it comes in many different forms, that you shall not die. And it's not speaking of as soon as you eat it, it's a poison apple and you're going to die. It's a bigger lie here. You shall not surely die.
No, I like that, and I think that Clementine recognitions Kepha says the same thing, that every temptation to man can be traced back to the serpent, and he goes through that list of 5 or 6 things, different ways that the serpent tries to entice. I would include in this the parable of Liz, the parable of the seed the parable of the wheat and the tares, in that the father, the master of the house, the king, sows the correct seed, and in the same field the incorrect seed is sown, and then it's up to us to logically parse out for our own welfare and well-being and eternal life possibilities, what is the correct seed and what is the incorrect seed. And I think you would agree with that, Liz. I think where we would divulge is that you think there's a possibility that reincarnation is part of the correct seed, where I would see it as not at all a part of the correct seed, and would line more with Jeremy there.
It is a possible explanation for many things. I don't, it's a non-essential, so to me,
I would think it's very essential.
I don't, because in Yeshua, I rest in Yeshua. So
sure. So, but if it's so non-essential, why do you spend your whole life digging into it?
See, Rich, you don't know me. I don't spend my whole life studying reincarnation. I study a lot of stuff. Okay.
That's all I've ever heard you talk about. I'm sorry.
Well, we've only twice. I've been on it, and because Jackson roped us into this, Jackson.
And all of your YouTube videos.
No, I've never. In fact, I have never talked on reincarnation in any of my YouTube videos. I've never
really?
Taught it, absolutely. And that's
I thought that's the first time I heard you talk about it was when I was watching one of your videos. I'm sorry. I apologize. So yeah, I would see it as very essential, because because getting back to what Jeremy's saying, that it's at the essence of sinning and not sinning, which is why, why we have the tickling ears, Protestant preaching right now in America, is because people want to be comfortable in sin and still be able to follow God. But all right, well, it's just now at the top of the hour. So does anybody have any questions or any comments, quick comments, or any possible things we can discuss for next week we can put on the table?
I just want it to be made clear that I'm not trying to be hostile about anything here. And I really am trying to get down to the bottom of this to some extent. And so Liz, I don't want you to think that I'm against Liz or against this or that. I'm just trying to get to the bottom of something so I can understand it.
Well, it's true. I'm not hostile. I'm just very passionate, and I apologize for my personality.
All right. Well, we'll see you guys next week. And, I don't know when it will be, but I think it would be good just in general. But once Jeremy's thing goes up from Wednesday night, everybody just watch that and look at some of the definitions. And even if you don't agree with the definition that he's saying, at least we'll know, how he's defining it. And that can give us a starting point for, what our definition should or could be. And just help us out.
Jeremy's presentation crapped out.
Oh,
yes. It's I feel horrible about it, but there was some kind of a glitch, and when it was done and it processed, I had about 10 minutes of it, where all the time it said it was. I'm thinking that maybe we ought to do that again.
Yeah, we can do it again.
It was so good. And
I've got a bright spotlight. I can interrogate him and ask him questions in the dark corner.
Yeah. So can we do it again?
Yeah,
Maybe?
we can do it again. We can do it this Wednesday.
Okay. All right. Let's do then.
Well, let's get a good advertisement on
it. That'd be fine too. I know people were probably looking forward to the answers that they had about life and death that were going to be answered this week. But
or you can do a couple hours. You can do the first part again and then answer some of the questions.
Sure,
absolutely.
You can do that too.
All right. That's all I got. Be blessed. Shabbat shalom.
Thank you all. That was very interesting. Have a good weekend and a great week. Thank you, Liz. Thank you, Jeremy. Thank you, Rich. And thank you, Ann. Shalom.
Shalom all.